The situation in Gaza is dire. Israel launched airstrikes. These strikes resulted in the deaths of over 50 people in just one day. Since October 7, 2023, the death toll has surpassed 50,000. Among the casualties was Ismail Barhoum, a key figure in Hamas's political wing. He was killed in an airstrike targeting Nasser Hospital. Earlier in March, over 400 Palestinians, many of them women and children, lost their lives in similar attacks. These actions have drawn widespread condemnation, with many calling them disproportionate and a clear violation of international law. The world watches in horror as the violence escalates, with no end in sight. The international community must demand a ceasefire. Both sides need to come to the negotiating table. This cycle of violence only breeds more suffering. The people of Gaza are caught in the crossfire, their lives shattered by a conflict they did not choose. Gaza's health system has crumbled under the weight of the unrelenting attacks. Hospitals are overwhelmed, struggling to cope with the influx of casualties. Many people remain trapped beneath the rubble, their cries for help growing fainter with each passing hour. Accurate casualty figures are nearly impossible to obtain, but the devastation is undeniable. The situation is beyond desperate. Only 3 hospitals in southern Gaza remain operational after the attack on Nasser Hospital. 2 months ago, reports indicated that 84% of health facilities were destroyed or damaged, water scarcity is severe, and 83% of food aid has been blocked, pushing the population to the brink of famine. The people of Gaza are facing a humanitarian catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. They are in dire need of medical aid, food, water, and shelter. The international community must act swiftly and decisively to provide assistance and alleviate their suffering. The conflict's ripple effects are being felt far beyond Gaza's borders. Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon have resulted in the deaths of at least 8 people, raising fears of a wider regional conflagration. Meanwhile, the United States has conducted strikes in Yemen targeting the Houthi rebels, who have been launching attacks on ships in the Red Sea. These events highlight the interconnected nature of conflicts in the Middle East. The situation is volatile, with tensions running high. The international community must work to de-escalate the situation and prevent the conflict from spiraling further out of control. The interconnectedness of these conflicts underscores the need for a comprehensive and peaceful resolution. Addressing the root causes of instability in the region is paramount. Failure to do so will likely lead to more violence and suffering. The international community has reacted to the escalating violence with a mixture of condemnation and calls for restraint. However, despite widespread criticism of Israel's actions, support from key allies, particularly the United States, remains unwavering. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio recently reaffirmed the U.S.'s unwavering support for Israel's military operations during discussions with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This stance has drawn criticism from human rights groups, who accuse the U.S. of enabling Israel's actions. The unwavering support for Israel from powerful nations like the U.S. fuels the conflict. It sends a message that their actions are acceptable, even when they result in civilian casualties and widespread suffering. Section 5, Hostages Held, a bargaining chip in a brutal game. The hostage situation adds another layer of complexity to the conflict. Hamas continues to hold an estimated 100 Israeli hostages, captured during the initial attack on October 7, 2023. These hostages have become bargaining chips in a brutal game, their lives hanging in the balance as both sides engage in a deadly standoff. Earlier in March, Israel demanded the release of half the remaining hostages as a precondition for extending a ceasefire. However, negotiations have stalled, and the hostages remain trapped in Gaza, their fate uncertain. The hostage situation is a humanitarian crisis within a larger conflict. These innocent people are being used as pawns in a dangerous game. Their safe return must be a top priority for all parties involved. Section 6. Displaced and destitute, the plight of Gaza's people. The ongoing conflict has forced nearly all Palestinians in Gaza to flee their homes multiple times. The constant fear of airstrikes and the destruction of their neighborhoods have left them with no choice but to seek refuge elsewhere, often in overcrowded and unsanitary conditions. The scale of the displacement is staggering. With 63% of Gaza's buildings destroyed or damaged, finding safe haven is nearly impossible. Families are torn apart, their lives upended by the violence. The relentless cycle of violence in Gaza has created a generation of people who have known nothing but displacement, fear, and loss. The psychological toll of living under such conditions is immeasurable. Section 7. How did we get here? A timeline of terror. The current conflict is the latest chapter in a long and bloody history. To understand the complexities of the situation, it's crucial to examine the events that led to this point. The war began on October 7, 2023, when Hamas launched a surprise attack on southern Israel. The attack, which killed 1,200 people and resulted in the capture of 251 hostages, sent shockwaves through Israel and triggered a swift and brutal military response. This timeline illustrates the cyclical nature of the conflict, with periods of intense violence followed by fragile ceasefires that ultimately fail to hold. It's a stark reminder of the deep-seated animosity and mistrust that fuel this seemingly intractable conflict. Section 8. The unending cycle. Can peace ever be found? With each passing day, the prospects for peace seem to dim further. The violence continues unabated, claiming more lives and exacerbating the humanitarian crisis. Both sides remain entrenched in their positions, seemingly unwilling or unable to break free from the cycle of violence. The international community's efforts to broker a lasting ceasefire have proven futile. The underlying issues that fuel the conflict remain unresolved, and mistrust between the two sides runs deep. The path to peace will be arduous, requiring both sides to make difficult concessions and confront painful truths. It demands dialogue, empathy, and a willingness to compromise. Without these elements, the cycle of violence will continue, leaving a trail of devastation and despair in its wake. Section 9. A plea for humanity, the world must act now. The world can no longer stand by as the situation in Gaza deteriorates. The silence of the international community is deafening. It is a stain on our collective conscience. We must demand better from our leaders, pushing them to prioritize diplomacy and peace over war and destruction. The people of Gaza are not pawns in a geopolitical game. They are human beings deserving of dignity, security, and a future free from violence. Their suffering is a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict and the urgent need for a peaceful resolution. We must act now, before it's too late. We must demand a ceasefire, an end to the bloodshed, and a renewed commitment to finding a just and lasting peace for all. The time for action is now.